Mariental, one of the largest German settlements on the Volga, was founded on June 16, 1766. It extended along the left bank of the tributary of the Volga, the Great Karaman River. The settlement was initially named after the first village headman, Pfannenstiel. Later, the parish of St. Mary was established there, and the city received the beautiful and melodious name Mariental. Mariental is flanked by high hills from the east. One gets the impression that they arose naturally. But it's not quite like that. The place was called Kirkisenberg by settlers. The mountains on the right bank of the Great Karaman were partially created by human hands. Out of fear of raids by the original steppe inhabitants, the Kaiserkirkisen, the German settlers piled up and fortified the banks of the then water-rich river. They enlisted all local residents to build the walls. Each family had to dig out a cubic fathom of earth, for which they received 7 measures of flour. These fortifications were not effective. While the cavalry, the striking force of the nomads, was indeed vulnerable on an open steep slope and easily visible from the other side of the river, such protection unfortunately only bought some time. Against the well-armed, impetuous nomad army, the earthworks offered no defense. At that time, the Kaiserkirkisen still lived in tribal communities and considered the Volga steppes their own. For decades or even centuries, the nomads grazed their livestock there. The new settlers, who spoke an unfamiliar language, were strangers to them. No one warned the German residents that the lands awaiting their colonization were already occupied by someone else. The event, almost 250 years ago, still weighs heavily on the hearts of the Marienthaler today. The raid in 1776 became one of the most horrific episodes in the history of the Volga Germans. On the day of the holy feast of the Assumption of Mary, the bells rang in the church. The sound of the bells attracted the nomads, and they attacked Mariental while almost the entire population of the city was gathered in the wooden church of the time. Dozens of people were killed, injured, or beaten and taken into captivity, but the survivors formed a detachment of irregulars and chased after the invaders.
Село немецкое стоит, ныне это Бородаевка, это стоит отряд киргиз-кайсаков, а там их было больше 1000 сабель, то даже ряды этих добровольцев поредели, ну, 75 человек, но они все равно погнали в погоню, направились за этими киргизами, так как это силы превосходили, то киргизы их уничтожили.
Никого в живых не осталось?
Один остался, Геснер.
Sergei Gersner is a direct descendant of the same Johannes Gersner who survived and escaped from captivity at that time. But Sergei is not only connected by the legend of his daring ancestor.
Здесь огромное количество моих родственников именно в этом храме. Их крестили, их венчали и их отпевали, потому что несколько сотен человек моей семьи жило здесь когда-то, и, к сожалению, все эти корни в 1941 году были утрачены, когда была депортация.
The Marienthaler were Catholics. The church was built in 1834 on the site of the old wooden one. The architect is unknown. However, historians assume that the construction was based on model projects designed by metropolitan architects such as Geste, Saratov, Stasov and others, and designated as mandatory for use in all provinces, even the most remote ones. Initially, the second guild merchant Yegor Bulkin from Saratov supervised the construction of this church. However, in the end, the community was short by 8,000 rubles, half of the agreed fee, so the construction was halted. The merchant Ivan Minich finally completed the church. Although the residents pointed out the discrepancy between the small bell tower and the huge church building, eyewitnesses called the Mariental Cathedral majestic. Its massive silhouette was visible from the hills in the surroundings. These unique film images, taken in 1928, confirm such a description of the building. The church had 4 columns at the entrance and 6 columns on each side, 40 oval and square windows and 3 entrances crowned by gables. According to the directory compiled in 1840 by Superior Vincent Snarsky, this church was one of the largest in the Volga region and the only stone church in the Catholic settlements of that time. The post-revolutionary fate of the church repeats the fate of many Christian churches on the Volga, whether Catholic, Lutheran or Orthodox. closure, machine tractor station, village club and completely looting. However, visiting the old German churches has become very popular among tourists today, and voices advocating for the reconstruction of the church are growing louder.
В настоящее время ведутся работы по признанию права собственности на данное здание. А сейчас оно поставлено на кадастровый учет, и в следующем году администрация данного поселения планирует подать иск о признании права собственности. То есть после признания права мы уже, в принципе, поскольку объект де юре будет существовать, сможем привлекать деньги и как-то заниматься его восстановлением.
Today, the history of Mariental is partly restored in a museum housed in the former school building. This building itself is also unique. In the 1930s, when the mass closure of churches began, the stone church of the neighboring village of Herzog was dismantled. With the church bricks, this school was built in 1937.
Само здание теплое, вот, а летом в нем прохладно. До сих пор это все не рушится, только-только. Вот считайте, школе будет через 3 года 90 лет.
А вот кирпичу еще в 2 раза больше.
А ему в 2 раза больше, если не в 3 раза больше, и он до сих пор стоит. Вот как построили, я понимаю, вот видно, что где-то нужно подлатать фундамент, все, но само здание стоит. Вот немцы строили, да, вот немцы строили.
The museum's exhibition is enriched by family artifacts, contributed by local residents. For example, this butter churn served the faith and truth of the Geringer family for a long time.
Сюда заливались сливки, сколько собиралось, там кастрюля, 2, заливались, закрывалась крышка, садились на стульчик и вот так вот пахли. Здесь уже было масло. Отсюда мы доставали. Там оставалась жидкость, которая называлась пахта. Очень вкусная.
Irina Geringer's father was born in Siberia during the years of exile. He was the youngest of 8 children. Among the Volga Germans, this family was not even considered large. There were families with 12, even 15 children.
Папа мне всегда рассказывал, он говорит, мы выросли, говорит, с помощью леса, говорит, с помощью, говорит, шишек, говорит, и ягод, потому что земледелия там не было.
Today, as the Volga Germans recall the events of 80 years ago, which are related to the deportation of more than 500,000 inhabitants from their homeland, many people visit Mariental. Those whose destinies were in some way connected to this once thriving center of German culture. Before the deportation, about 10,000 Germans lived here. Here they baked bread and made cheese, grew tobacco, raised livestock, and printed newspapers. Windmills and steam mills turned here. Tailors and shoemakers' workshops worked. A variety of German wooden and stone houses are preserved, representing the unique architectural appearance of the provincial town. Today's Mariental, now Sovetskoje, became multinational, and representatives of various peoples live here in peace. Nevertheless, the Church of St. Mary, which gave the city its name, remains the historical center. Will Mariental ever hear the sound of bells over the valley? Everything is in God's hands. Everything is in the hands of man.